Big time fight coming up this weekend at lightweight UFC 263. We've got a short notice replacement, and Matt, while earlier on in the week we had Frank Camacho take on Matt Frevola, unfortunately Frank Camacho involved in quite the car accident, so wishing nothing but the best for the crank, Frank Camacho. And now, all of a sudden, Matt, really interesting prospect entering the UFC in T-Rex, Terrance McKinney. And this is a fighter that a lot of UFC fans and Dana White's Contender Series fans know and really love. And Matt, if we focus on Terrance McKinney for just a second, in his fight on Contender Series, he took on Sean Woodson. Ultimately, he lost. He was KO'd by a crazy knee. It was Sean Woodson's ticket to the UFC. Terrance McKinney was a minus 320 favorite going into that fight. He dominated the first round. He dominated the majority of the second round until he got up and Woodson landed the knee. So from McKinney, little bit of a lapse there into his next fight against Darren Minner, and you can find that down on the YouTubes, the dark web, wherever you might be watching your fights, but you can definitely find it fairly easily. It was Midwest Championship fighting. It was billed as two Dana White's Contender Series vets, not winners, but vets. And for McKinney, they get into a clinch situation after striking. And listen, all of Terrance McKinney's wins are by finish. All of his losses are by finish as well. But he gets Darren Minner down, and it's really nice the way that he does it. Plays around in the guard, and he gets caught in a triangle, and he loses. Since then, he took a year off, 2020, obviously due to the pandemic. There wasn't a lot in terms of regional MMA. 3 wins in 2021. All of them first-round finishes, 16 seconds, 17 seconds, and just over a minute 12, his last knockout. Oh, and by the way, if I pull that up on Tapology, that was, 4 days ago. And they're measuring in hours. 4 days, 14 hours ago. This is a guy that trains out of a really interesting gym coming in here out of Spokane, Washington with Warrior Camp and Sick Jitsu. Matt, you already know some of the fighters there. Who can you name?
Out of Sick Jitsu off the top of my head? No one, oddly enough.
Michael Chiesa, Sam Cecilia. You got Tough 29's Brady Heistan. And we also have 6'6" heavyweight that spent a little bit of time in the UFC. You know him as Daniel Spitz. But for Terrance McKinney, long-rangey southpaw, really wide base. He throws an insane head kick. If you want to see a crazy one, maybe don't go to his last 2 fights, but against Diedrich Sanders on the regional scene, again, just 2 months ago, lightning fast, knocks him down, finishes him. In his last 2, he did it against Gavino. He did it in his last fights against Michael Izari in the main event with LFA. Now, every time he's gone to throw them in his last 2 fights, he slipped and kind of did a bit of a barrel roll to get back to his feet. Little weird, maybe concerning, but that's kind of the wrap on Terrance McKinney. I get a full page of notes on this one. He's taking on the forever wrestler Matt Frevola, and that's how we build him in the Camacho fight. You just didn't get to see that because obviously the fight fell out before we put the videos out. The one thing I want to say, Matt, before I hand it off to you, for Terrance McKinney, JUCO All-American, and he was a Division II wrestler when he was in college, so pretty good credentials that way. I mean, we've seen a lot of JUCO and D2 guys come up. I know Corey Anderson had a bit of a career that way. There's a lot of D2 and D3 wrestlers.
I know Corey Anderson's the guy you want to be like, wow, have a career like him, but okay.
Beast in 25-8. But if you do look at it, I mean, you don't have to be a D1 All-American to be a really good wrestler. You know that you're going to get that out of McKinney in his back pocket to go along with the striking. But Matt Frevola, primary wrestler, if there ever was one.
Matt Frevola loves to shoot himself some double legs, but that's what he's really good at. And with Matt Frevola, he is a fighter who knows what he's good at, and that is a really important thing when you talk about the skill set of Matt Frevola. Because if he's a guy who, let's say Matt Frevola ever did get happy with his hands, I feel like he would start losing fights very fast, but he is someone who, he's got that great wrestling background, and he's got the cardio to go along with his wrestling too, and that's a really important factor as well. Matt Frevola is never a guy who I'm worried is going to out-wrestle himself almost. He's a guy who can keep a decent pace, and he's someone who will switch between double A and single A's consistently. He's not someone, we had mentioned when, what was the fight? Claudio Puelles and Jordan Levitt. And we were talking about how both of those, they're both wrestlers, but they both kind of get happy with that one kind of wrestling. They both can only shoot single legs or only shoot double legs. That's not something you have to worry about with Frevola. And honestly, the thing about Frevola that I really like is when he gets guys up against the cage, that's kind of when the wrestling does start. He's a guy who can accomplish the takedown from the middle of the mat and up against the cage. That's really important because even, listen, we're going to talk about the main event too, or I guess people have already heard us talk about the main event, but one of the big keys to that fight is, can Marvin take down Adesanya in the middle of the cage? For Matt Frevola, he can kind of do it in both spots. He's really good at controlling his opponents from both spots too. And that's the thing we have to convince ourselves. Listen, Terrance McKinney is probably going to have a really good UFC career, and those losses that you brought up are two UFC caliber fighters, so there's no shame in those losses anyways. But this thing you have to ask yourself, can a guy who fought 4 days ago, who cut weight 5 days ago, compete with Matt Frevola on 3 days' notice. It's a really hard ask for anybody because there's guys who are borderline ranked fighters in the UFC who are going to have their hands full with a guy like Matt Frevola. So for me, the question really comes down to, could Terrance McKinney beat Matt Frevola one day? I'm sure he could, don't get me wrong. And just can he do it on 1 week's notice, coming off another fight? It's just a lot of question marks and a lot of extra wrinkles that I'm not really comfortable with.
The weird thing about this one, McKinney's last fight, main event with LFA, 109, it was a catch weight of 160 pounds. So now you're going to 155, but he used to fight at 145, and even the Contender Series fight against Woodson, 145, the fight against Darren Minner, 145, but this year in the 3 wins, 155, 55, and then of course 60. And for Matt Frevola, stranger things have happened. This guy got knocked out by Martin Bravo in the UFC. How crazy is that?
It is wild, but as Steven Peterson can prove, Martin Bravo's in some weird fights.
All right, Matt, but when we do look at the numbers, this is the one other thing that I wanted to throw out there, the Matt Frevola wrinkle, because again, he's supposed to be taking on Frank Camacho, who brawls, but he has a bad chin, but he has good wrestling, but we never really see it. For Matt Frevola, significant strikes per minute. Given 2.73 to taken 3.44. That's a negative 0.71 clip. It's also below average in both categories. The average given and taken 3.28. So he's below in both. He is a subpar striker, and we've seen enough of him in the UFC to get a bit of a baseline. He has taken on good strikers, Jalen Turner, Luis Pena. Those are wins. You like them because he's able to take those guys down who don't really have the best takedown defense. The other thing that he does have, though, kind of sneaky. If you just go by the numbers, it doesn't make sense, but 37% takedown accuracy and 40% takedown defense, those are both average, if not below average.
They don't tell the whole story.
That's it. His takedown averages that he actually accomplishes per fight in just number value is above average. Submission attempts above average. So you do like to see that out of Frevola. But the trouble is, I mean, they're so low because he just goes and goes and goes and goes. And if somebody goes to take him down, the Zarukian fight kind of outweighs everything in terms of takedown attempts or takedowns given up. But you know that Frevola does have that.
Stylistically, Frevola's just been in there with a lot of guys who either A, do the complete opposite thing he does, and then last time out, like you had mentioned, it was just kind of unfortunate that he was in there with Arman Zarukian, who... I don't really know where you guys feel on Arman Zarukian, but you can tell that there's something really special there with the talent, and he just kind of does everything Matt Frevola does, but a little bit better, and I don't feel like numbers tell the whole story with Matt Frevola, because like you had said, this striking might not be up to par. Ben Simmons straight up can't shoot in basketball, but he is an all-star level player. Matt Frevola doesn't need the striking to go out there and have really good fights. I think his cardio really is enough to push people to where they're diminished versions of themselves in that second and third round. And I really do think if Terrance McKinney can't finish Matt Frevola early on in this fight, he's going to get wrestled early and often. And I'm not saying that McKinney doesn't have the counter wrestling to hang with Frevola. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that the cardio really is going to be a factor. We were going in there and blowing the doors off guys in 13 seconds. That's great. And I know we talked
16 and 17.
Sorry. And I know how we talk about how it's not always who you beat, it is how you beat them. But when you're beating everybody so fast and in 20 seconds, you're not learning anything about your skill set. You're not learning how to fix those mistakes that came up in the Sean Woodson and the Darren Minner fight. Again, I do think Terrance McKinney will have a bright future in the UFC. And I do think this will be another one of those learning experience fights, but it's super hard for a guy in his UFC debut to fight and beat Matt Frevola on 1 week's notice.
So, last thing for me, when I looked at the fights last weekend, Kamwell Kirk taking on Makwan Amir Khani, we can kind of go back and forth until the cows come home. Did Amir Khani have a bad weight cut? Sure. Was Kamwell Kirk coming in on super short notice, having just fought? Yeah, he did, and he ultimately won. Same thing with Gregory Rodriguez. Super short notice.
The difference is that
came in and win.
Makwan Amir Khani gets tired in 3 seconds, and Matt Frevola, the one thing that I do trust in his game plan is the fact that he can weaponize cardio.
And that's the thing. When I look at McKinney, really, really fast finishes, and if he's losing, he's just making little mistakes. Again, against Darren Minner, you can't goof around in his guard. He's going to submit you. Against a guy like Sean Woodson, you can't take a second off because he just keeps going and going. So it's going to be really tricky in this one. I would favor the gas tank of Frevola. When I do look at the odds, Frevola open to minus 430. He's now at a minus 258 on the sites that have it, and best fight odds for the averages there. McKinney open to plus 320. He's a plus 207 right now. So the line has moved a lot. If we have a look over on Tapology, 139 votes, because this was just announced last night. 71% Frevola, 77% by decision. For the 29% that have McKinney, 83% by knockout. If you really, really like Terrance McKinney, maybe you want to go with a first round finish. I could see that as a possibility. I was really split on this one watching the tape and then kind of bringing everything together because Matt Frevola has kind of struggled against guys that can at least have two different bases. If they're not just a striker, maybe a wrestler, he has a little bit more success. So Terrance McKinney, I can see him coming out here like a bat out of hell in the first round. And I mean the entire first round. Let's see how the second round goes if we get there. So for me, I'm ever so slightly going with Long Island's own Matt Frevola in this one. What are you saying?
I agree 100% with the Tapology vote and kind of how they're split right now. Because for me, and again, let's get this out of the way, the definition of a pop and popcorn fight.
Oh,
because
yeah.
and I'll start with Matt Frevola as well to get that out of the way. But this is a very dangerous fight for him against somewhat of an unknown commodity coming into the UFC cage. So for Frevola, there is quite a bit to lose here for him. So hopefully he can get this win and then go for those other guys like in the Luis Pena category.
All right, Matt. We're both going with Matt Frevola, but again, it is a tight fight, and those odds don't really tell the whole story. So pop and popcorn over here. Big week planned for Fight Night Picks, Matt. A little bit of inside baseball. Right after this, we're going to do a card break. That's going to be coming out on Thursday, so make sure you check that out. And that's going to be linked with a fight companion for UFC 263 on Saturday night. Come hang out with us, Matt. Really looking forward to it. You're going to want to keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it.